Let's talk about running backs that you should start or sit heading into week 8 of the fantasy football season. The good news is no teams are on bye. We have 32 teams in play, 16 matchups in total, starting with Thursday night football, an actually exciting matchup, not Broncos and Saints like we saw last week. The Vikings at the Rams, 46.5 point over under. The Vikings are favored by 3 points. Aaron Jones, the definition of a must start. When he's healthy, he's getting all the work. He's so dynamic, so explosive, used in the air, used on the ground, averaging well over 4.5 yards per carry. The guy has been so good. He's been vintage Aaron Jones, and it's a good matchup to chase as well. I'm expecting a very good game. On the opposite side of the ball, of course, Kyren Williams, the RB5 through 7 weeks, and the guy's already had his bye. I mean, he's one of the best running backs in fantasy football right now. There's not a single game where he hasn't scored a touchdown. He's averaging more than 1 touchdown per game as well through the season. Do not overthink it, even though it's a bad matchup. All right, moving on to Ravens at Browns. So this is the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games. 42.5 point over under. The Ravens are heavy favorites, 9.5 point favorites. That's the third largest spread of the week. Derrick Henry, what is there to say about Derrick Henry that we haven't already said? The dude is electric. The first half, he could be gone. And the second half, you just know the man is coming. You gotta be prepared. I mean, the guy is a monster. Looks like the best version of himself maybe that he's ever been. I mean, one of the most valuable players in fantasy. Of course, you're gonna play him, even though it's a bad matchup. On the opposite side, Nick Chubb, it was great to see him back last week. However, I predicted that they'd slowly work him into the offense, and that was true. He only played 36% of the snaps. He had 11 carries and was only averaging 2 yards per carry. So you can start him, but this is not a good matchup versus the Ravens. They're a pretty good run defense, even though as of lately, they've been giving up more and more yards on the ground. But you can start him. He'll probably be their preferred option if they get to the goal line. But the issue is, how many opportunities will they have in the red zone versus the Baltimore Ravens with all the injuries they've had, trading away Amari Cooper? So look, he's a fine option, but I would have low expectations. All right, moving on to Titans at Lions, 45.5 point over under. And the Lions are the heaviest favorites of the week, 10.5 point favorites. Again, the largest spread of the week. Let's start with Tony Pollard. Had 22 touches last week, and unfortunately, it did not turn into a good fantasy day, but he is still the lion's share in this backfield. He is the focal point of the offense, to be honest with you, and he looks pretty good most weeks. Just had a bad game last week. However, this is a terrible matchup. So while he's a must start as my RB24, I would have very low expectations. If you get 10 points in a PPR league, you should feel very good about that. And of course, if they're ever on the goal line, Tony's going to have a chance to punch the ball in, right? On the opposite side of the ball, Jahmyr Gibbs, of course, a must start. If there's no David Montgomery, he's a top 5 play. If David Montgomery is in play, they're both top 10 plays. And as of right now, we just got a report, according to head coach, obviously over there in Detroit, that he shouldn't miss time. So we'll monitor that throughout the course of, the next couple of days through practice reports. But all indications are that David Montgomery is going to continue to play. And if he does, of course, he's got to be in your lineup. We know how good he's been this year. All right, number 4 matchup here, Colts at Texans. Now, I have some good news for Jonathan Taylor owners out there. Jonathan Taylor is expected to practice this week. That is a great sign for his availability in this game. Now, I will say, not a good matchup to return, right? I would have rather him come back last week versus the Dolphins than this week versus the Texans. The Texans allow the 4th fewest amount of points per game to the running back position. They are a tough defense to run on. But of course, if he's playing, you got to play him all-world talent. And on the opposite side of the ball, of course, Joe Mixon is that dude. The guy looks so good. I mean, he is probably the best running back on a points per game basis this year. If you only look at games where he stayed healthy, weeks 1, 7, and 8, the guy is the entire offense. He's getting fed carries on the ground, fed targets. He's one of the best running backs in fantasy football right now. By the way, if Jonathan Taylor is ruled out, Tyler Goodson becomes a spot start. He's the name that you should start over a Trey Sermon. They did go ahead and give Tyler Goodson more opportunities last week, and I think they might do that again if Taylor misses time. But of course, if Taylor plays, those guys have no value. High over under 46.5 points. Texans are favored, as they should be, and it should be a fun game, a divisional matchup. All right, moving on to the Packers at the Jaguars. People always say I say the Jaguars wrong. All right, how do you say Jaguars? Is it Jaguars? Is it Jaguars? Is it Jaguars? How is it? You tell me. I don't care. All right, the Jags. All right, let's talk about the Jags. All right, well, currently they are 4.5-point underdogs, and this is tied with 3 matchups for the highest over-under of the week with 48.5 points. So we should see a lot of fantasy points from this game. Josh Jacobs is a great play. The Jags are 7th in points allowed to running backs, so he should have a extended streak. Last week got into the end zone. I would not be surprised if he does again this week. And on the opposite side of the ball, man, it's going to be very difficult to figure out Etienne and Bigsby all week. What I will say is you're going to have to stay tuned to the practice reports. If Travis Etienne plays, I'm not a big fan of playing either of these names. You can put them out there as a desperation play, but Doug Peterson has been very, very consistent in saying that if Etienne is healthy, he's still the number 1 running back. I know Bigsby looks better. I know Bigsby looks great. He just had a great game versus New England, but they're very strong in the sense of Etienne is their number 1 back. So if both guys play, I don't really want to start a running back, but if Etienne is ruled out, Tank Bigsby becomes my RB22, a must start purely because of the volume that he should see. Remembering last week, he had 27 total touches and a positive game script, which obviously helped him. All right, moving on to Cardinals at Dolphins, 48.5-point over-under. Another matchup tied for the highest over-under of the week. So we should see a lot of fantasy points. Tua Tags is going to be back, in my opinion. That's not officially reported, but he's back at practice. All indications are that he should play. So the Dolphins are favored by 3 points, and Devon Achane is going to return to league-winning status this week. I wholeheartedly believe that. This offense has been so bad without Tua. Tua steps in. Sure, there should be some rust, but there'll be plenty of dump-off opportunities. Remember, Devon Achane was averaging 7 targets per game when Tua was their quarterback. I believe he's going to be back. He's going to be the best version of himself, and he's an absolute must-start top 10 play. The same can be said for James Conner, right? The Dolphins are the 6th best matchup for your running back, and James Conner is dominating touches. He looks so good. He's had, I believe, 4 really, really good games, and he's had a couple duds, but this is a great matchup that you should chase, in my opinion, my RB18 on the week. All right, the 7th matchup we'll look at is the Jets at the Patriots, 40.5-point over-under, and the Jets are favored by 6.5 points. Breece Hall, if you're a Breece Hall owner, the changes at offensive coordinator, the changes on play caller for the Jets has been everything for you, right? If you look at weeks 6 and 7, Breece Hall is averaging 22.5 touches per game, and Braylon is down to 3.5. There was a little stint there, right, when Nathaniel Hackett was still calling the plays, where Braylon Allen and Breece Hall were slowly starting to get closer and closer in touches per game. New coaching staff said, actually, no, Breece Hall's a superstar. Let's not forget that. And now Braylon is the definition of a handcuff. He has no value outside of a Breece Hall injury. Breece Hall is a must start every single week. My RB4 in a great matchup. The Pats give up the 3rd most points to the running back position. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, it's not a good matchup for the Patriot running backs. And typically you could start Stevenson because he just got so many touches in the first 2 weeks. But now it's as confusing as it ever has been. I don't know if you can start Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, last week, JaMychal Hasty got the most work of any running back. Gibson's going to be involved. Ramondre had 10 touches, but is 10 touches in a Patriots offense really something that excites you in a bad matchup? So it depends on your options. I'd say 75% of people have a better name they can play this week. But of course, if you have no options because of injuries, you can throw him in there, hoping that he'll be their guy. All right, the 8th matchup, we'll look at another divisional matchup. Falcons at Bucks, 48.5-point over-under. Honestly, guys, that might update soon with the injuries to Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. I could see that coming down. I could see lower expectations for both of these offenses. But let's talk about the Falcons. Bijan Robinson, the RB9 on the week for me. And similar to Breece Hall last week, we saw a huge difference in the way they deployed their running backs, right? In week 6, Bijan and Tyler split carries down the middle. In week 7, Bijan had 26 touches. Algier had just 6. You can see their averages on the year, but it looks like potentially the injury that Bijan was dealing with earlier might have impacted his total touches, and now he's on track maybe to be that league-winning running back that we expected him to be. You can run on the Bucks. They're the 11th best matchup, so you can definitely play him. Now, as far as Rachaad White and Bucky Irving, Strangely enough, they were both really good plays versus a tough, very tough Ravens defense. But I don't know how really to deploy these guys on a week-to-week basis. The Bucks aren't always going to score over 35 points on any given matchup, right? So there will be games where these guys will be busts. I'm considering them spot starts. It's not a good matchup to chase, but clearly Rachaad White and Bucky Irving are the names to play if you're going to play one. Bucky had 12 touches last week and Rachaad had 16. And then you got Sean Tucker, who was a fun story. Hopefully you didn't waste your fab on him, which we talked about in our video. He had just 7 touches. So look, you got 3 running backs that are getting opportunities. Eventually they are going to bust, but again, like Ramondre Stevenson, if you need a spot start, then you can start him. It just wouldn't be my preference. All right, moving on to the Eagles at the Bengals. 46.5 point over under. Personally, I think this should be the highest over under of the week, but the Bengals are favored by 2.5 points. Let's talk about Saquon Barkley, the RB1 in my rankings. He'll probably be the RB1 in my rankings every single week, regardless of matchup. The matchup isn't bad. It's about middle of the pack, but Saquon is Himothy, and he's reminding us and showing us what he could be behind a good offensive line. On the opposite side of the ball, Chase Brown has slowly but surely taken over this backfield entirely. In week 6, he had 62% of the snaps compared to 45 for Zach Moss. In week 7, he had 58% of the snaps compared to 49 for Zach Moss. He had 13 touches in week 6. He had 17 touches in week 7. He is taking over the snap share. He's taking over the rushing attempts in the backfield. He's taking over the targets. He really is becoming a league winner if you drafted him. And I think you can play him, but lower your expectations because it's not a good matchup versus the Eagles. Most people try to throw on this team, not run. Okay, this takes us to the start of the 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games. We've got Saints at Chargers. This is the second lowest over-under of the week. The Chargers are favored by 7.5 points after losing to the Cardinals on Monday Night Football. Alvin Kamara laid his first egg. Not a egg. I guess an egg is 0 points, but he had 8 points Thursday night versus the Denver Broncos. The offense was weird. He had 7 targets and still somehow only finished with 8 points. I do think they're going to be better moving forward, so I would still label him a must start. Of course, we saw week 6 without Derek Carr. He had 17 points, so I wouldn't overthink it too much. And as far as the matchup, it's not good, but still, Alvin Kamara gets so many targets in the air that he's got to be in your starting lineups. Look, if you're in a league that has no points per reception, a standard format, then I could see sitting Alvin Kamara, but any sort of format where you have points per reception, I definitely think he has to be in your lineups. All right, as far as J.K. Dobbins goes, still running the offense for the Chargers. He pretty much is their entire offense. It's great to see him back healthy and an important part of a team. He had 17 touches last week. Didn't turn into much fantasy points, unfortunately, but definitely someone that you can still play. The Saints are giving up the 5th most points to the fantasy running back position. This is not common, by the way. If you look at the last 3 to 4 years, the Saints have been one of the toughest rushing defenses in the entire NFL. And for whatever reason this year, they've kind of fallen flat on their face for the last 3 or 4 weeks. They're one of the worst rushing defenses in the last 2 weeks alone. So I definitely think J.K. Dobbins is in play in a matchup where the Chargers are heavily favored. So we should see a lot of J.K. Dobbins. All right, moving on to the Bills at the Seahawks. 47.5 point over under, and the Bills are favored by 3. 2 defenses that are giving up a lot of points to fantasy running backs. And that means both of our superstars are in play, right? James Cook in play, my RB20. You can definitely put him out there. I'm not going to lie. I'm a little bit concerned about the usage of Ray Davis. Ray Davis is starting to eat into that time. He's eaten into those touches. I mean, last week, James Cook only had 12 total touches. That is by far a low on the year. I mean, we're looking to see him get at least 15 touches per game. Let's hope that happens this week versus the Seahawks. And as far as Ken Walker goes, I mean, the guy is a superstar, has missed 2 games due to injury, and is still the RB8 on the season. Absolute dominant performance, has had no bust games this entire year, and now he gets to face the Bills, who give up the 2nd most points to fantasy running backs. He's got to be in your lineups, no doubt about it. All right, the 12th matchup we'll look at here is the Bears at the Commanders, the number 1 versus the number 2 overall pick. If Jaden Daniels is healthy, we'll have to wait and see, but DeAndre Swift is a must start for me, my RB17. He has been dominating touches. Ever since they changed their identity in week 4, it's been DeAndre Swift's season. All right. Before week 4, Very few rushing attempts for him. The offense wasn't really focused on the run game. In week 4, everything changed. He's had, 23 touches in week 4, 23 touches in week 5, and 21 touches in week 6. Then they had their bye week. He is the focal point of this offense right now, and it's working. They're winning games. Their offense is moving the ball. So definitely a must start. And then on the opposite side, Brian Robinson, hopefully he practices a little bit more because it's very clear to us that he's not 100%. If he was, even in these blowout games, he'd be playing a little bit more, but I don't mind the matchup. You can run on the Bears. It's very difficult to throw on them. If Brian Robinson is healthy, he's got to be in your lineups. And then Eckler is a spot start in a deeper format, your 14, your 16 team leagues. But in most 12 team leagues, I think you'll have a better option than Austin Eckler. He's just not getting enough work. All right, the 13th matchup we'll look at is the Panthers at the Broncos. 41.5 point over under, and the Broncos are favored by 7.5 points. Honestly, it makes sense. The Panthers are the worst team in the NFL, and they're starting to look worse and worse and worse. You can start Chuba Hubbard. I don't like the matchup. Chuba is my RB24, but I got to be honest, guys, I'm getting worried because Jonathan Brooks should be back soon. In fact, if you get a report that Jonathan Brooks is back in this game, it might be time to look at alternate options. So I'm giving you a bunch of context here. Again, if Jonathan Brooks is back, you might have a better option. We've been begging you to sell high on Chuba Hubbard for 3 or 4 weeks. Hopefully you were able to do that because Brooks is going to have a role. You don't draft the running back in the second round to not use him in your offense. Jonathan Brooks is going to take over the RB1 role at some point. I don't know exactly when that will be, but be careful with Chuba Hubbard moving forward. On the opposite side of the ball, this is probably the best matchup for any running back in fantasy. Javonte Williams is a smash start this week. My RB21 in my rankings. The Panthers give up the most points to the running back position. You've got to start Javonte pretty much in every format. All right. He should have another smash week. All right. Moving on to the Chiefs at the Raiders, an AFC West showdown. The Chiefs are heavy favorites. They're favored by 10 points. That is the second highest spread of the week. And Kareem Hunt should be an incredible play. Kareem Hunt is the offense. Kareem Hunt is basically Isaiah Pacheco to this offense, but he's not as efficient. He's not as good of an athlete at this point of his career, but he's getting fed touches. He had 28 touches in week 5. Then they went on a bye. And then last week versus the San Francisco 49ers, he had 24 total touches, including 2 rushing touchdowns. When they're in the red zone, when they're on the goal line, Kareem Hunt is that dude. And the Raiders are giving up the 8th most points to fantasy running backs. Kareem Hunt has to be in your roster. I unfortunately lost Chris Godwin in the Flock League. Pour one out. I can't talk about it yet. I'm still sad, but Kareem Hunt will be replacing him in my lineup. All right. Let's talk about the Raiders for a second. Not a good matchup. In fact, this is the worst matchup for your running backs in fantasy football. Alexander Mattison is a volume play. You go back to week 5 versus Denver, Mattison had, 18 touches? He finished with 10 fantasy points. That is best case scenario for Mattison this week. Gets all the touches, gets some targets through the air, maybe sneaks in a touchdown, and around 10 fantasy points. So if that's exciting to you, if that's the best option on your roster, go with it. He is the starter, but just be aware this is a terrible matchup on a terrible offense. All right, this brings us to Sunday Night Football. We've got the Cowboys at the 49ers. Should be a great matchup. 47.5 point over under, a very healthy line. And the Niners are favored by 5.5 points. Rico Dowdle is a spot start. I mean, he will eternally be a spot start until he gets injured or until the Cowboys trade for a running back. He's just the definition of a spot start. On a good offense, will get a lot of touches, but completely mediocre player. So if that interests you, you can run on the Niners. They are about middle of the pack against running backs, so you can play him. On the opposite side of the ball, Jordan Mason becomes one of my favorite starts of the week. He is healthy. We saw that. He had 16 touches versus the Chiefs in week 7. They couldn't really establish the run because they were down the entire game. But now he gets the Cowboys, who have been bleeding points to running backs. They're 4th in points allowed to the running back position, so he's definitely in play. All right, last matchup of the week, Giants at Steelers. I would have rather this been Sunday night and put Cowboys-Niners on Monday night, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, lowest over-under of the week, 37.5 points. And honestly, it makes sense. I don't expect a shootout from these teams. Do not expect a Bucks and Ravens type of game on Monday night. The Steelers are favored by 4.5 points, and I see 2 spot start options. Tyrone Tracy's the spot start. He has taken over the role in New York. First week with Devin Singletary healthy, Tyrone gets 67% of the snaps. Great. That's exactly what we wanted to see. But only 9 total touches. It was a weird game for that offense in New York. They were not really moving the ball at all. Daniel Jones looked bad. Now they have to face the Steelers. It's not a good offense to try and bounce back from, right? So you can play him, but have very low expectations. Again, Alexander Mattison, think about that. 10 points you'd be happy with, right? Moving on to the Steelers, Najee Harris is kind of on a heater right now. I mean, back-to-back weeks with a touchdown, back-to-back weeks over 16 PPR points. I think the Giants defense is much tougher than people realize. But look, you can play Najee Harris. I will say, though, don't be surprised if Jaylen Warren steals a couple weeks here and there. Jaylen Warren had 15 total touches last week compared to 22 opportunities for Najee Harris. So we're starting to see that backfield get more and more split. Eventually, I do think we'll look at Najee and be, we'll think again, you can put him in there, but I'm not excited about it. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's a bust. Because that's been the 100% truth so far this year. If he scores a touchdown, he's been good for fantasy. If he doesn't, it's been terrible. And I think that's how it's going to be for the rest of the season. So if you predict a touchdown, great. But keep in mind, this is the lowest over-under of the week. We don't expect many points. So again, lower your expectations for a name like Najee. All right. I appreciate y'all for watching the video. Hey, if you have a start-sit question that you want us to answer, check out the pinned comment. There's a link to our website where you can ask us a question at any point and we'll answer it for you. Also, if you don't have a free account with Flock Fantasy yet, go ahead and sign up using the promo code LAND, L-A-N-D. When you sign up for a free account with the promo code LAND, you'll get the expert consensus rankings for free, the trade calculator for free, and the My Teams Analyzer for free. So much value for you guys just by getting an account. A thank you from us. I appreciate you for watching. See you soon. The wide receiver video will be out later today. All love. Go win in week number 8. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.